a crisis that we have in the city of Glasgow is so vital that we take action now in order to reduce those harmful levels of air pollution.
I've got to pay bills, and to pay bills I have to go where the work is, and where the work is city centre, and this stops us, or certainly inconveniences, and it is frightening.
Will low emission zones protect public health in our city centres and deliver a sustainable future? Scotland's Net Zero campaign is moving up a gear. From June, vehicles that enter Glasgow city centre will need to meet strict emission standards or pay the price. The low emission zone is confined within this area. It's boundaried by the M8, the High Street in the east and parts of the River Clyde. Cars that don't meet the standards aren't allowed in, and if drivers break that rule, well, they can be fined anywhere between £30 and £480, depending on how many times they've entered the zone. Ollie Dickinson has been investigating the purpose of LEZ and who it's going to impact the most.
The way we get around Scotland's biggest city is about to undergo a major change. Low emission zones will be enforced in Aberdeen, Dundee and Edinburgh from June next year, but it's Glasgow that's up first.
Undoubtedly, this is the biggest challenge coming through a pandemic and all that came along with that, the changes that are going on in the city, the low emission zone and the lack of available vehicles, but massive challenges for the trade.
Dougie McPherson is the chairman of Glasgow Taxis. For 13 years, he's driven one of the 750 cabs that bear the company name.
Well, having worked in an environment where all your working hours and your annual leave were all controlled, the major attraction was working for yourself, working hours that suited you.
But the flexibility of being self-employed comes at a cost.
The only choice in new vehicle is around £70,000. Drivers would require to finance that, having come through a pandemic. To introduce a new bill to a household of somewhere in the region of £1,400 a month is not going to happen for someone in their late 50s. So they will look for the low-cost option.
Another option is to have your taxi modified to meet the targets. But for 50 cabs, that isn't possible, and 200 are still waiting for work to be carried out.
There are supply chain issues for these retrofit engineering solutions, which mean that drivers and operators don't know when they will be able to get their vehicle retrofitted, and once that has happened, they will require to keep that for a further 3 years.
All vehicles entering the LEZ will need to meet the emission standards. That's Euro 4 for petrol cars and vans, generally vehicles registered from 2006. Euro 6 for diesel cars and vans, vehicles registered from September 2015. And Euro 6 for buses, coaches and HGVs, generally registered from January 2013. 85 to 90% of the 125,000 vehicles that enter Glasgow every day are expected to meet emission standards. But that's little comfort to drivers, and Dougie says some will have to leave the industry because of the changes.
Taxis still very much do have a part to play in an integrated transport system in Glasgow. The Connectivity Commission referenced that. The placement of taxi ranks being critical. Glasgow would suffer greatly without that provision.
Dougie says a lot has changed since Glasgow City Council announced the emission zones.
Right from the get-go, we supported the low emission zone. I think very few people would push against that. It's absolutely the right way to go, but there is so many things have happened between when that was drafted and now, and Glasgow needs to take a step back here, look at the examples of other cities, in particular look at the funding options that are available to keep the trade moving.
Air quality levels here in Glasgow have a similar effect on your body to smoking 92 cigarettes every year. And Friends of the Earth Scotland say that across the country, air pollution leads to around 2,500 deaths every 12 months.
One of the difficult things to understand about low emission zones is a transport idea, a transport policy, but it's for health outcomes, it's to improve our health in the city of Glasgow. We've been waiting 15 years for a low emission zone. That's a generation that have grown up with increased risks of things like asthma, and no action's been taken, no low emission zone, nothing else.
Glasgow City Council's own internal audit of the zones warned the policy could hit poorer people harder.
Transport and air quality have inequalities baked within it. Richer people drive more, they own more cars, they drive more, so they pollute more. And people in the lowest incomes, low-income communities, breathe in more polluted air. So our current transport system has rich people driving cars and poor people breathing in those fumes.
Glasgow has already introduced some of the LEZ. The most polluting buses have been banned from the city centre since December 2018. But Gavin admits there is a long way to go if Glasgow wants to meet its ambitious target to be net zero by 2045.
Public transport in Glasgow is pretty shocking. The bus network in particular, you ask anyone, wait at any bus stop. When you look at the changes that are happening across Europe, that cities are being reshaped to have more space for people to reduce emissions, cities in Scotland are way behind on things like transport, public transport, pedestrianisation, limits on car use, all of those things. Yeah, we need a real step change.
And then there are those who can't use public transport, even when it is available.
I live in the Cumbernauld area. It takes me about 20 minutes coming to work. My car is a 2012 Mondeo, so it doesn't fit in with the LEZ compliance, so it's just a no-go into the city centre.
Susan has a range of mobility issues and completely relies on her car.
I cannot walk very far. The distance from the car park to my place of employment is just what I can manage. I can't do buses. I get travel sick. Trains, again, it's back to the travel sickness, but it's getting to the train station. Again, I would need my car.
She accepts something needs to be done about air pollution, but wonders why exemptions can't be made in certain circumstances.
I looked at it, and the car park that I currently use is 0.3 of a mile from the zone edge. Why can't they make a corridor? It's not just me.
Those who live within the zone won't be charged until June 2024, and blue badge holders are exempt from the LEZ charges altogether. But Susan doesn't qualify.
You know, I'm wholeheartedly behind it, but at the same time, I've got to pay bills. And to pay bills, I have to go where the work is. And where the work is, unfortunately for me at the moment, is city centre.
What are you going to do on June the 1st?
I don't know. I don't know, Oliver. At this moment in time, I still don't know. You know, I can get quite upset about it. You know, everybody's coming back with buying a new car. It's not an option. I'm still paying for this. This car is perfectly, you know, fit for the job that it does. But I don't think I'm being unreasonable in saying that there must be another way around it.
Glasgow City Council says locals have been consulted on and warned about these zones for years now.
This is fundamentally about public health. This is a crisis that we have in the city of Glasgow where, you know, for a number of years we've had widespread and dangerously high levels of air pollution, the highest concentrations in Scotland.
Glasgow's journey to low and eventually no emissions will rely heavily on people being able to walk, cycle and catch public transport.
There is a long way to go. We are working with the bus partnership around improving bus priority, bringing down journey times, and indeed we have big aspirations around active travel, around an integrated public transport system.
Whilst a big change for Glasgow, more than 300 cities around Europe have already introduced similar schemes.
We know from the 300 plus cities around Europe that these kind of schemes, these kind of measures work. There's absolutely no reason why Glasgow can't be more like Copenhagen or like Amsterdam or any of these cities that have actually been on some of these journeys for decades already. But it's something that we need to do, because if we fail to move forward, then that will be more progress lost on improving public health and on creating a cleaner environment for people who want to live, work, visit the city centre.
Well, Copenhagen has been hailed as one of the greenest and cleanest cities in the world. We sent STV's environment and climate correspondent Caroline Lewis to the Danish capital to find out why the city's approach to achieving net zero is so far ahead of Scotland's.
Copenhagen is a city of transformation. A few decades ago, it was close to bankruptcy, entirely dependent on fossil fuel, and the waterways were polluted with waste. But today, that seems like a distant memory.
It has changed completely. Now you can swim in the harbour and people will stay here in summertime. Now today there are no people, almost no people, but in summertime there'll be hundreds or thousands of people. So it has become some kind of new city beach in Copenhagen.
Unlike Scotland, low emission zones are not a new concept in Denmark. Diesel lorries and buses have been banned from the capital since 2008. Kasper Harbo is a key figure in the municipal government and has been integral in reducing the city's emissions, which have fallen by more than 40% since 2005. He says the key to Copenhagen's success has been getting people to turn their backs on cars altogether.
When we ask people why they bike in Copenhagen, they say they do it because it's fast, it's easy, it's cheap, and it's good for the health. And then comes the environment as number 4 or 5. So then, of course, because there's been political will and also dedicated funds for many years across, across parties, the different parties have actually agreed to spend quite some money on bicycle infrastructure.
More than 560 kilometres of cycle routes snake through the city, and half the working population now commute by bike. But Copenhagen is about to take its commitment to carbon neutrality a step further. Later this year, the city centre will become a zero-emission zone, meaning all petrol and diesel vehicles will be banned from entering altogether.
Of course, there are people that are not happy about the new, but I don't think it has been a big. I don't think it has been a big issue because we've had the low emission zone for so many years. So I think we've just gotten used to it, and I think in general also people are concerned about the environment, are concerned about air quality.
But it isn't a complete success story. The Danish capital had planned to become the world's first carbon neutral city in just 2 years' time, a target it's now likely to miss. Nørrebrogade is one of Copenhagen's busiest and densely populated streets. In the last few years, cars have been phased out, but it wasn't a popular change at the time. Like Glasgow, some feared new rules would ruin business, but years later, it seems attitudes have changed.
This street has really blossomed as like a retail street, especially like the last years. So it must be a good thing.
But it didn't happen overnight. Businesses did fail, and the area changed. In effect, over time, it gentrified.
I think cities have to accept that wanting change, no matter which way change goes, always comes with some skepticism and possibly resistance from citizens or other parties or shops and whatnot. You need to see that change and experience it before you are able to really comprehend what it implies and what kind of life quality that it brings to you.
But cycling isn't the only green way to get around the city. Everywhere you turn, there's an abundance of sustainable options. Public transport, both on land and on water, is fully electric, and the city's fully automated metro system is renowned for its speed and reliability.
making advantages where a car maybe have to go on a detour and you give the right of way or the direct travel route for walking and cycling and public transport. So you have these time benefits. If you can make it attractive from a time perspective to ride your bike to a destination, it has to be something else than just hitting on money or climate change, because in the end of the day, you commute the way you have set up your life.
But what if people didn't have to rely on public transport as much? Many places in Scotland, including Glasgow, Edinburgh and Dundee, are all planning to build 20-minute cities. So I've come here to Copenhagen's first livable neighbourhood, built on a former industrial shipyard in the city's northern edge. It's a place that residents can get everything they need, from office space to restaurants and shops, in just 5 minutes. Norham is already home to some 5,000 people. By 2050, it will cover 4 million square metres and accommodate 40,000 inhabitants and 40,000 workplaces.
This is a very large post-industrial site, a very big area. So the concept was to actually dig a lot of canals, and then we have a series of islets that can be then turned into individual districts, and you can take them one by one and you can finish a neighborhood, and then you can move on to the next and you can build that neighborhood, and it will create a small community where people live and people work, and you have cultural facilities, you have schools and daycare and so forth, everything you need within a short walking distance.
Catherine Maxwell has studied how both Scotland and Denmark approach their climate targets. She says low emission zones are just the start of what needs to change in Scotland.
A key challenge for Glasgow will be around developing an integrated transport system. It's not joined up at the moment. It needs to be as convenient as, getting in your car and being able to drive across town.
Catherine says we can learn a lot from Copenhagen's approach. But is the Danish capital as green as its reputation?
They have really pushed that level of ambition a lot further than most other cities. I would say that it's always a risk to do that, but it can pay off, because even if you don't reach that specific target, you'll be a lot closer than you think.
Well, with us now in the studio is environmental campaigner Laura Young and motoring journalist Elaine Catton. Thank you both so much for joining us. So we heard in Caroline's report there, they were saying there's an abundance of other sustainable options to get around other than the car. Are there enough alternative ways for people to get around in Glasgow? Is the public transport system up to it?
It definitely isn't, and lots of us might have been to other cities in the UK, places like London, or of course abroad, like we've seen in that piece there. And in Glasgow, there just isn't the accessibility, the reliability, and sometimes the affordability to get on public transport. And that's why so many people need to choose their car. And if we are putting in place something like the LEZ, we need to have a really robust public transport and active transport system for people to take instead. And I think that's where the worry comes from, is people really feeling like there's not another thing that they can fall back on to make this an effective implementation.
Yeah, so if you're coming in from a rural area and, there's not enough buses, what are people supposed to do?
Well, that's a very good point. I came in today from a rural area. I live out in Perthshire, and effective park and ride systems are a start. So, and I don't mean somewhere where you can park your car and then wait for half an hour for a shuttle bus to come. It needs to be something that makes it easy for me to get to where I'm going, easier than then driving in and finding a parking spot in the middle of the city, and less expensive as well. So that would be I would say the low-hanging fruit for something like that would be to have an awful lot more and more effective park and ride systems.
Because, we heard in the piece as well, in Ollie's report, Susan, who's got mobility issues, she's really worried about what she's going to do. There's going to be lots of people like that. And also there's accusations that it's hitting the poorest the most.
Exactly. And I think the one thing that I would urge people to do is to get in touch with the council. There are some exemptions for up to a year that can be put in place, and Glasgow City Council will be receiving removing those, and we'll deal with those hopefully on a case-by-case basis, which will extend the amount of time a person has to think about their options. But of course, we then need to be thinking, if this person can't get a new car or can't take public transport, what way can we support them? And that's both from the government, the council, but also hopefully workplaces can get creative, think about cycle to work schemes, but how can they support their employees transition to cars if they need to be in the city centre, or think about ways of giving people flexible options that mean they don't need to be coming all the way in or at certain times. And I think we just need to see a bit of creativity from all sides on this topic.
And do you think people are ready for this? I mean, we've seen the LEZ signs up everywhere, but I didn't really truly know what it was about until this week. I didn't know whether my car, qualified or not. Do you think we're ready?
Probably not. I think there's a communication issue. It is a conversation that needs to be had an awful lot more often. Transportation is a fundamental part of our lives. Whether we own a car or not, we're dependent upon it. But it's something people take for granted, and they take for granted their routines. And if you're in a routine, it's very difficult to look at the alternatives. Even if the alternatives are there, it's a difficult relation to break. It's a difficult habit to break. So if it's almost like a security zone, and a car is a little bit like that. It's a security zone, and to make that break is a big step, and that takes a lot more encouragement, and it takes probably more conversation than we've had to date on this topic.
I mean, it's going to 85 to 90% of cars are not going to be affected at all. In Copenhagen, they've got lots of other methods to try and bring down emissions. Do you think more should be done? Is this a bold enough move, Laura?
I think we need a lot more, and especially when you look at one of Scotland's climate targets, it's to reduce car kilometres by 20% by 2030. And right now, all we're seeing is barriers, but we aren't seeing the great solutions. Actually, we're just making it harder for people to get about. And so what I would love to see is a bit more creativity with what we do with public transport as well. We saw, because of fuel prices, Germany did this €9 ticket for all public transport for a month to see what it would do for people. And then they've now gone from that and decided what would work for them. And what I would like to see is Glasgow and Scotland get creative with ideas when it comes to public transport. Put in more initiatives like the free buses for under 22s, but it might be something different. See what works, see what gets people out of their cars in a positive way.
Rather than a punitive way.
Yes, indeed. And there's a thing that is, in industry speak, it's called Mobility as a Service, MAAS, and actually there's a body in Scotland called Mass Scotland that's exploring that, and that's an industry body that it's a mixture of industry, public sector, other what they call stakeholders that are involved in this. That's a great idea. It's a great start, but it's getting these people around the table and getting the ideas up and running and rolling so that they're talking about it, that it's turning the talking into actions. Now, like Laura says, there needs to be a lot more creativity in that, and that it's not just about public transport in the traditional sense of buses and trains. There's other options like car clubs. Glasgow has at least one car club that I know of, and that's where people can join that. They don't have to have a car of their own. They can basically borrow a car paid for by the minute, by the hour.
Yeah, they do that in London. It's a great idea.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and this scheme will be coming to Edinburgh, Dundee and Aberdeen sometime in the next couple of years. So everyone will be looking to Glasgow.
They will, and I think hopefully we can learn some lessons and really get it effective in Glasgow and beyond. But it's also important that even if people don't live in Glasgow, they understand this, because how many people come to Glasgow for something in the evenings or for a shopping or whatever it might be. And the problem with this one is it's a fine every time you come in, which gets worse.
Well, we'll have to be super careful, but it's coming to us soon. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. And that's all from Scotland Tonight. Thanks for watching. Good night.